York, this is Democracy Now!
I'm announcing that I will direct all states, tribes, and territories to make all adults, people 18 and over, eligible to be vaccinated no later than May 1.
In his first primetime address, President Biden vows to accelerate the vaccination effort and bring more normalcy to the country by July 4th. We'll speak to Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz about Biden's $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan and Stiglitz's call for vaccine equity and debt relief for developing countries. Then we air a shocking report from inside Yemen on the world's most devastating humanitarian crisis.
Hodeidah is the supply gateway for the rest of the country. It should be bustling with activity, but today it is eerily empty. A result of the US-backed Saudi blockade. The last tanker to dock here was in December. In the echoing silence, it dawns on us. We are about to witness the terrible impact of this blockade.
And we'll look at how Oprah Winfrey's interview with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry has exposed racism within the British royal family.
Didn't want to be alive anymore.
There is a conversation. Hold up.
There are several conversations.
There's a conversation with you,
with Harry,
about how dark your baby is going to be?
Potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
Ooh.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Joe Biden signed the almost $2 trillion economic stimulus and coronavirus relief bill Thursday, one day ahead of schedule following its final approval by Congress Wednesday. Some of the $1,400 direct payments will arrive in bank accounts as early as this weekend. In a prime-time address from the White House, Biden said the U.S. was set to mark independence from COVID-19 by the 4th of July, thanks to a mass vaccination effort that's reaching about 2.25 million U.S. residents a day.
First, tonight, I'm announcing that I will direct all states, tribes, and territories to make all adults, people 18 and over, eligible to be vaccinated no later than May 1.
During his speech, President Biden also condemns surging hate crimes against Asian Americans over the past year. Biden and Democratic leaders are holding a ceremony at the White House Rose Garden today celebrating passage of the stimulus bill. Biden and Vice President Harris will begin a nationwide tour promoting the legislation next week. We'll have more on the coronavirus relief bill after headlines with Nobel Prize-winning economist Joe Stiglitz. The U.S. recorded 62,000 new coronavirus infections and over 1,500 deaths Thursday as governors continue to roll back public health measures. In Europe, Denmark, Norway and Iceland have suspended use of AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine after reports of severe cases of blood clots and one death in vaccinated people. It's not known if the vaccine caused the clots, and European Union regulators say the vaccine's benefits continue to outweigh its risks. Meanwhile, Reuters is reporting that Biden administration officials have denied requests to ship millions of stockpiled doses of AstraZeneca vaccine from a factory near Baltimore to countries desperate to use them, even though the vaccine is not approved for use in the United States. The UN says over 88 million people around the world were facing acute hunger by the end of 2020, and some 34 million are now on the brink of famine. This is the World Food Programme's David Beasley.
WFP estimates that at least 34 million people are knocking on the door of famine. These looming famines have two things in common. They are primarily driven by conflict, and they are entirely preventable.
Beasley said Yemen is heading toward the biggest famine in modern history, and many parts of the country feel like, quote, hell on earth after years of food shortages and destruction brought on by the U.S.-backed Saudi-led war. We'll have more on Yemen later in the show with CNN correspondent Nemel Bagir. Humanitarian groups are also raising the alarm for millions in Ethiopia's Tigray region amidst the ongoing conflict, which has prevented the delivery of food and other aid. President Biden's meeting virtually today with the leaders of Japan, India and Australia for the first ever Quad summit. Participating nations said ahead of the meeting they'll discuss trade, the climate crisis, and vaccines, but the informal group is largely seen as a strategic bloc against China. Beijing has accused the Quad of perpetuating a Cold War mentality. A warning to our audience. The following stories contain descriptions and images of police violence. In Texas, Austin police officer Christopher Taylor has been arrested on murder charges in connection with the killing of Michael Ramos, a 42-year-old Black Latinx man who was shot to death by police last April after a 911 caller falsely reported he had a gun. It's the first known case of an Austin police officer being charged with murder. Video of Ramos's final moment showed him holding his hands up and shouting he was unarmed when an officer shot him with a beanbag round. After Ramos retreated to his car and tried to drive away, Officer Taylor opened fire with a rifle, hitting Ramos 3 times. He was pronounced dead later in the evening. In Minnesota, a judge has reinstated third-degree murder charges against Derek Chauvin, the white former police officer who killed George Floyd by kneeling on his neck for more than 9 minutes last May. Jurors will also have the option to convict Chauvin on second-degree murder or manslaughter charges. Of the 6 jurors selected in Chauvin's trial so far, 3 are white men, 1 is black. Civil rights attorney and activist Nikema Levy-Armstrong said in response, quote, "We need people who have a history of understanding the context of what's happening in this country and how what happened to George Floyd is a perpetuation of the lynchings black people experience time and time again," she said. To see our full interview with Levy-Armstrong, go to democracynow.org. Meanwhile, Judge Peter Cahill has also said he won't allow character evidence of George Floyd during the trial, such as describing Floyd as a peaceful person or referring to him as a gentle giant, as he was known to friends and family. In California, a new report is denouncing the Los Angeles Police Department's violent mishandling of racial justice protests last summer, sparked by the police killing of George Floyd. The report, commissioned by the City Council, cites LAPD's illegal detention of peaceful protesters and the officers' excessive use of force, including assaulting protesters with rubber bullets, beanbags, and batons. Meanwhile, Kentucky State Senate passed a bill Thursday that would make it a crime to taunt a police officer. The legislation follows huge protests for Black lives in the wake of the police killing of Breonna Taylor, the 26-year-old African-American EMT shot to death in her Louisville home by police. Saturday marks the first anniversary of her killing. The Trump administration's former acting Pentagon chief is blaming Donald Trump's January 6th speech for inciting the mob that attacked Congress. Chris Miller made the remark in an interview with Vice on Showtime.
The question is, would anybody have marched on the Capitol and overrun the Capitol without the president's speech? I think it's pretty much definitive that wouldn't have happened.
Washington Democratic Congressmember Pramila Jayapal is calling for a congressional investigation into whether 3 Republicans took active roles in promoting the deadly assault. They're Congressmembers Lauren Boebert of Colorado, Mo Brooks of Alabama, and Paul Gosar of Arizona. Jayapal was one of about a dozen lawmakers trapped in the House gallery that afternoon as violent pro-Trump insurrectionists pounded at the doors. She tweeted Thursday, "I didn't know if I would make it out alive." GOP members who aided insurrectionists or stoked the flames that day must be held fully accountable, she said. The British royal family is facing increasing criticism after Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's bombshell interview with Oprah Winfrey. The couple revealed shocking details about life as royals, including the racism suffered by Meghan Markle, who is biracial. On Thursday, Prince William was approached by reporters.
Sir, have you spoken to your brother since the interview?
No, I haven't spoken yet, but I will do.
And can you just let me know, is the royal family a racist family, sir?
No, we're very much not a racist family.
Prince William said, "We are very much not a racist family." We'll have more on racism in the royal family later in the broadcast. The New York Assembly has opened an impeachment inquiry into sexual misconduct allegations against Governor Andrew Cuomo, as well as his cover-up of COVID-19 deaths at nursing homes. It could lead to New York's first impeachment effort in over a century. Meanwhile, the 6th and most recent public accusation against Cuomo, that he groped an aide last year at the Executive Mansion, has been reported to the Albany Police Department for possible criminal prosecution. And in Brooklyn, New York, community members joined healthcare workers outside of Kingsbrook Jewish Medical Center Thursday, demanding a reversal of Governor Cuomo's plans to close inpatient services at the hospital. Some 80% of Kingsbrook patients are Black, and community leaders warn its closure would exacerbate the unequal health outcomes and disease burden in a neighborhood that's already one of the hardest hit by the pandemic. This is community organizer, City Council candidate Anthony Beckford.
The more that they take away our housing, the more that they take away our food sources, and now they're taking away our health care. This shows you that there's a war on the community that must be addressed. It can no longer be ignored. Right. Because at the end of the day, at a blink of an eye, this will all be gone, but we must make sure we fight so that way it stays. But we must also hold their feet to the fire, because while they're getting richer, they're siphoning the money and the resources out of our communities as we struggle more and more. This is a working class community that has gone through so much suffering over the years, and it must stop.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Biden signed the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package Thursday. Democrats are hailing the deal as the largest anti-poverty bill in a generation. One study projects the law will lift almost 14 million Americans out of poverty, including 5.7 million children. On Thursday night, President Biden gave his first primetime address, marking 1 year since much of the country shut down due to the pandemic.
I signed into law the American Rescue Plan, an historic piece of legislation that delivers immediate relief to millions of people. Includes $1,400 in direct rescue checks, payments. That means a typical family of four earning about $110,000 will get checks for $5,600 deposited if they have direct deposit or in a check, a treasury check. It extends unemployment benefits. It helps small businesses. It lowers health care premiums for many. It provides food and nutrition, keeps families in their homes, and it will cut child poverty in this country in half.
President Biden also announced he would direct state, local, and tribal governments to make all adults be eligible for a COVID vaccine by May 1st. He also set a goal of July 4th for the country to, quote, mark independence from the virus.
Do everything in my power. I will not relent until we beat this virus. But I need you, the American people. I need you. I need every American to do their part. And that's not hyperbole. I need you. I need you to get vaccinated when it's your turn and when you can find an opportunity. And to help your family, your friends, your neighbors get vaccinated as well. Because here's the point. If we do all this, if we do our part, if we do this together, by July the 4th, there's a good chance you, your families and friends will be able to get together in your backyard or in your neighborhood and have a cookout or a barbecue and celebrate Independence Day.
President Biden also used his primetime address to condemn the surge in hate crimes targeting Asian Americans.
Often we've turned against one another. A mask, the easiest thing to do to save lives. Sometimes it divides us. States pitted against one another instead of working with each other. Vicious hate crimes against Asian Americans who've been attacked, harassed, blamed, and scapegoated. At this very moment, so many of them are fellow Americans. They're on the front lines of this pandemic trying to save lives. And still, they're forced to live in fear for their lives just walking down streets in America. It's wrong, it's un-American, and it must stop.
We're joined now by Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, Columbia University professor, and chief economist for the Roosevelt Institute. He served as chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Bill Clinton and as chief economist at the World Bank. His latest book is People, Power, and Profits: Progressive Capitalism for an Age of Discontent. Thanks so much for joining us, Joe Stiglitz. Can you start off by talking about the transformational aspects of this American Rescue Plan?
First, let me say it was enormously important that the economy be rescued. And that's why that $1.9 trillion package was so important. But within it, it was designed to begin a transformation. And what you talked about earlier, the number of people who are being lifted out of poverty is absolutely essential. You know, the first act passed under the previous presidency, one of the few acts in the process of what is called reconciliation, was a tax bill in December 2017. And the difference couldn't be clearer. That was a tax bill that helped the billionaires and the corporations. The money went to the top. This is a transformation with the money going to the people who really need it.
So talk more about the significance of this. I mean, the reason it was able to be passed with not one Republican joining in the House or the Senate, even though astoundingly they are starting to take credit for it. The Mississippi Senator Wicker, who tweeted out immediately how much money it was going to bring to restaurants and to keeping people on the payroll, which was one of the arguments for it, of course. He just didn't mention he did not vote for it. But take us back to FDR, what this means. It's only for a year, and if you think it could be carried out from there.
Well, I think it can be carried out, but to be permanent, it's going to need a change in Congress in 2022. It's very clear that the Republicans, at least for now, have come under the influence of extreme polarization and have become the party of Trump. And so it's all about polarization, not a single one supporting what is necessary just for the economy to recover. You know, so even if you thought we don't want to help the poor, you need to have the economy recover, and everybody will benefit from it. So while it moves a lot of people out of poverty, it was an essential bill for the economy to get back going again.
I mean, the child tax credit on its surface might look like just another tweak to the tax code, but it defines a profound shift in how we view society confronting poverty, much like the New Deal's creation of Social Security and what that did for the elderly. Could this continue?
I believe it can. I mean, when you think about it, children don't choose their parents. And if there is any concern about the future of the country, you want to make sure that the children, no matter who their parents are, can live up to their potential. One of the things that I pointed out in my research is that the American dream is really a myth. The life prospects of a young American are more dependent on the income and education of his parents than in almost any other advanced country. So it's absolutely the opposite of the way we think about ourselves. And so this is a transformation that says we are actually going to try to live up to our aspirations.
You have also the $5 billion for farmers of color, for black farmers, in debt relief. The Republicans are trying to make this the kind of poster child example of, well, they're talking about reparations. But how key is this, Professor Stiglitz?
Well, this addresses a kind of legacy of discrimination that we've had. When you've had a legacy of discrimination, you have to undo it. It's not a question of reparations, although I think there's a strong argument that can be made for reparations. But just for our society to go forward with a modicum of equality is going to necessitate dealing with some of the consequences of the discrimination of the past.
Is this the end of trickle-down economics?
I hope so. I hope we've learned that, as I mentioned earlier, the 2017 bill of Trump was hopefully the last gasp of trickle-down economics. The theory was giving all that money to the corporations and the billionaires would lead to sustained economic growth from which everyone would benefit. What we saw in that bill was that the money overwhelmingly went to share buybacks, dividends. Very little of it trickled down to ordinary workers. That was a real demonstration that trickle-down economics didn't work. And this is the antithesis of what Trump did, building up the economy from the middle and the bottom.
Joe Stiglitz, you and fellow Nobel laureate economist Michael Spence have issued a call for vaccine equity and pandemic debt relief for the Global South. The issue also the subject of a new report by the Institute for New Economic Thinking's Commission on Global Economic Transformation. Talk more about your call and what role the Biden administration could play to fight the pandemic globally.
Well, there are two principles that I'd want to emphasize. First, the world won't be free from the pandemic. America won't be free from the pandemic until the world is. And we're especially concerned now because of the evidence of mutations. And if that disease, COVID-19, is going on elsewhere, it gives it opportunities to mutate and come back and inflict us. And we don't know the extent to which the vaccines will protect us against these mutations. So far, things are okay, but you have to worry. So we have to get the disease under control everywhere. So it's in our self-interest. It's, of course, a matter of humanitarian concern as well. And the second principle is there won't be a strong global recovery unless there's a recovery everywhere. So that means, first, we have to make sure the vaccine is available everywhere. And unfortunately, right now, there is what some people call vaccine hoarding. The developed countries are getting vaccinated. There are dozens of developing countries that have not yet had a single vaccine.
I mean, as one doctor said to us, he's gotten more vaccines, his normal 2-dose, than 130 countries.
That's right. To put it another way, Canada has acquired contracts for 9 times its population, while dozens of poor countries have 0.
And there's a fight now in the Biden administration around AstraZeneca. The U.S. has tens of millions of doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Other countries are begging for it, and so far the U.S. has not released them to other countries.
Well, the real issue here that we emphasize is this is an artificial shortage, that if you had a waiver of intellectual property rights, something that is being discussed right now with the WTO, but unfortunately the advanced countries, including the United States, have not come out strongly for that waiver. There are, just like President Biden pointed out that you could have Merck help produce a vaccine that was developed by another company because it had excess capacity. There are many companies in developing countries that could produce massive amounts of vaccine if they had the intellectual property, if they get access to the technology. So that's why it's so important for us to have the suspension of intellectual property rights related to COVID-19. It's just foolish that we aren't doing it. And it's particularly unconscionable given that the advanced countries' governments have actually financed a very large fraction of that research. And the companies themselves are already making multiple returns on their investments.
Finally, this issue of debt relief, what would it look like and what role could the U.S. play in the debt relief of developing countries?
Well, the United States has been spending almost, 25% of its GDP to support its economy, if we include the $1.9 trillion that just passed. It has helped. It has actually worked, and I think it will work. But the developing countries just don't have the resources. They can't have that kind of fiscal stimulus, the fiscal support for the economy. And that means that those countries whose economy is afflicted, which is most of them, are going to have a hard time coming back. Well, there are two things. One is a special issue of what are called SDRs, special drawing rights, which are a kind of money that IMF issues. There's a call for $500 billion of SDRs, some $650 billion of SDRs. Unfortunately, under the previous administration, Trump vetoed this initiative. This would make an enormous difference. The second thing is there are some countries that are particularly badly afflicted. They have debt, and their economy, all their money is going to, or a very large proportion is going to service that debt. There has to be debt relief. Now, in the beginning, there was an agreement there would be a stay in payments in debt. But that just meant that the debt wasn't released. It just meant it was postponed. Now that the pandemic has lasted so much longer than people thought in the beginning, what is needed is a debt restructuring. And it has to be comprehensive. It has to include the private sector. What the United States could do is to make it much more to help induce the private sector participate. They've been reluctant to participate. They've not been willing to face the reality. We have 10 seconds. No, they've not been able to, so they need to encourage the private sector to participate in these debt restructurings.
Joe Stiglitz, I want to thank you for being with us. Nobel Prize-winning economist, Columbia University professor, chief economist at the Roosevelt Institute, served as chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Clinton, and as chief economist at the World Bank, speaking to us from San Juan, Puerto Rico. When we come back, we'll air a shocking report from inside Yemen on the world's most devastating humanitarian crisis, then speak with the correspondent. Stay with us. Juvenescence by Yasmin Williams. This is Democracy Now!, the Quarantine Report. The World Food Programme's warning Yemen's heading toward the biggest famine in modern history. The UN agency is projecting around 400,000 Yemeni children under the age of 5 could die from acute malnutrition this year as the U.S.-backed Saudi war and blockade continues. We turn now to a shocking new report from inside Yemen by CNN's award-winning foreign correspondent, Naim El-Bahir, who will join us after. A warning to our audience, the video contains disturbing images.
The derelict coastline of the north of Yemen. Rusting hulks tell a story of war, blockade and devastation. For years now, the Houthi-controlled north has been increasingly isolated from the outside world. We secretly traveled through the night by boat after our previous reporting here led the government to deny us entry. On the road to Hodeidah port, we get a sense of the humanitarian disaster kept from the outside world. Along the roadside, hundreds of stalled food supply trucks with no fuel to move. In a country in the grip of hunger, their cargo stands spoiling in the hot sun. The port of Hodeidah is the supply gateway for the rest of the country. It should be bustling with activity, but today it is eerily empty. A result of the US-backed Saudi blockade. The last tanker to dock here was in December. In the echoing silence, it dawns on us. We are about to witness the terrible impact of this blockade. Desperate patients and family members trying to get the attention of Dr. Khalid, chairman of Hudayda's hospital. If he signs these papers, they get some financial relief for their treatments and medicines. He doesn't get far before he is stopped again and again. Since the Yemen war started 6 years ago, families have been in financial freefall. The fuel blockade has sped that descent into oblivion. This is the main hospital for Hudayda province, and we're surrounded by doctors and nurses rushed off their feet.
This is a garden, our garden.
Is this a normal day? Is this busy all the time?
No, not the busiest day.
This is not a busy day?
It's a normal day.
Wow.
Dr. Khalid wants to show us some of his critical patients in the therapeutic feeding center. A 10-year-old girl whose growth has been so stunted by starvation, she can no longer stand.
Dr. Khalid says every hour of every day they are receiving more and more cases of severe malnutrition that are this advanced because the parents can't afford to feed their children. They also can't afford to bring them to the hospital to treat them.
The UN says pockets of Yemen are in famine-like conditions, but it says Hudayda is not considered one of them because it doesn't meet the metrics to declare famine. But Dr. Khalid thinks the reality on the ground has outpaced the UN's projections. The Saudi fuel blockade is biting. Malnutrition numbers are spiking, and at the same time, this busy hospital is running out of the vital fuel that keeps its generators running. Which means that babies like Maryam, who doctors say at 2 months weighs the same as a newborn, would die. Yemen has been devastated by a civil war which has pitted Iran-backed Ansar Allah, known as Houthis, against the internationally recognized government and a US-backed, Saudi-led coalition. We're in Houthi territory, some of whose officials have been designated as terrorists by the US for targeting neighboring Saudi Arabia. We've been granted a rare interview with a leading Houthi official. We must meet in an undisclosed location because his aides say of the threat of assassination. We ask him to respond to allegations they are escalating this war.
Not true at all. The battle is continuing. It has not stopped.
Do you trust America to take forward negotiations to bring peace here in Yemen?
Trust must come about decisions. So far, we have not seen any concrete decisions being made.
You've spoken about being subjected as a nation to international terror, but 3 of the leaders within the Ansar Allah movement are designated by the US as terrorists. One of your key slogans talks about death to America. How do you see this as pushing forward the negotiation and the possibility for peace in the future?
When we say death to America, they effectively kill us with their bombs, rockets and blockades. They provide logistics and intelligence support and their actual participation in the battle. So who is bigger and greater, the ones who are killing us or the ones who say death to them?
The Biden administration has announced it has withdrawn support for the Saudi offensive, but it comes after 6 long years of war. And for the children dying of hunger, it still hasn't brought peace any quicker. Peace and help can't come soon enough.
Over half the hospitals in this district are threatened with shuttering. This is one of them. They need urgent support, urgent help. Can you imagine what it would do to this community if this facility was shut down? Look at the chaos that there is already here, and that's while it's functioning.
For years now, the UN has been warning that famine is coming to Yemen. Doctors across Yemen's north tell us famine has arrived. Another hospital witnessing wave after wave of children in the red zone. Severe malnourishment. Impoverished mothers desperate to keep their children alive are forced to make harrowing choices.
Just to get to the hospital, I stopped eating and drinking. Not even water, just to get him treated.
These doctors are keeping track of the numbers spiking beyond what they ever imagined.
The doctor was saying that in 2020, this population, 23% of the children under 5 here were severely malnourished. In 2021, they think that that number is going to go over 30%. There is no doubt in his mind, he says, that they here in Hajjah are in famine.
Nearly 3 years ago, the UN Security Council condemned the use of starvation as a method of warfare, demanding access to supplies that are necessary for food preparation, including water and fuel, be kept intact, here and in other conflicts. That clearly hasn't happened. What's more, the world has stopped caring. The UN needs almost $4 billion to staunch this crisis. They received less than half that from donors. Numbers don't lie, but numbers also don't reflect the full tragedy. This is Hassan Ali. 10 months and struggling to breathe, he came into the hospital 6 days ago. He keeps losing weight, even with the critical care he's receiving. Hours after we left, Hassan Ali died. One more child in Yemen that represents so much more pain. The doctors here are desperate for the world to see and to help. Ni'am al-Baghir, CNN, Hodeidah, Yemen.
That report again by CNN's award-winning correspondent Naima al-Baghir inside Yemen. Naima now joins us from Khartoum, Sudan. Naima, welcome back to Democracy Now! This is an absolutely devastating report. Rarely do reporters get in to show this. Explain how you did this.
Well, we had an application for a visa in with the Saudi-backed internationally recognized government out of Aden for about 8 to 9 months, so from autumn last year, and we just kept being given the runaround. They wouldn't refuse it, but they also wouldn't outright give it to us, and at the same time it was becoming clear that the situation inside Yemen was deteriorating much more rapidly than any of the aid agencies had actually up until that point believed. And so we, our amazing senior producer Barbara Vanitides and our senior photojournalist Alex Platt, made the decision, backed by CNN, that it was worth taking this risk and traveling by boat to the north of Yemen through those waters that are patrolled by Saudi warships and through those waters where the Saudi blockade is maintained from. And frankly, even having read so much of the data before we arrived, we were utterly unprepared for what we found when we got there. It was, I don't know that words can do justice to what the situation is like there. When the World Food Programme call it hell on earth, I think that is the only way you can understand what life is like for Yemenis.
And hearing the devastating cries of the malnourished children, the infants, and those that have died and continue to die, what was Saudi Arabia's response to this report?
We didn't receive one. We didn't receive an on-the-record report. After the piece first aired, minutes later, the Saudi ambassador to the U.S., Princess Rima bint Bandar, released a flood of commentary to the Saudi-based English language newspaper Arab News, speaking about how the Houthis, what their role was in this, saying that the Houthis didn't want peace, but fundamentally not engaging with the basic foundation of our reporting, which is that a Saudi blockade that has stopped fuel tankers from going in for over 2 months is exacerbating the financial and humanitarian crisis and is bringing the country over the precipice into oblivion. That is, and by the way, the United States has also not responded in a very clear manner to us as to whether they continue to support this blockade, because the blockade exists because at the start of the war, then President Obama and now President Biden allowed the Saudi-led coalition to blockade land, sea and air ports into Yemen. So this exists because of the acquiescence of the United States. And the United States has not engaged with us in any way on the impact of that.
Okay, how has the U.S. responded to this report?
They denied the basic premise of our reporting, which is that these ships had been blocked from entry into Hodeidah port and were in international waters, but these waters at the moment are patrolled by the Saudi-led coalition and controlled by the Saudi-led coalition further north off the Saudi port of Jazan. They told us that in spite of the evidence that we show in that reporting and in spite of the screen grabs that we have online showing where they are on independent commercial vessel tracking apps, that actually this wasn't true, that these ships were off the port of Hodeidah and that the flow of food remains unimpeded through the port of Hodeidah, which again is categorically
not true. And this is from the U.S. envoy to Yemen. This is the person who is supposed to be pushing for a peaceful solution to the situation there.
And this is the new U.S. Special Envoy to Yemen, Tim Lenderking?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, on Thursday, USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is now headed by Samantha Powers, a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, notified Congress that it would resume some aid to Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen, reversing the Trump-era policy. But humanitarian groups say Yemenis need far more help. Talk about the significance of this.
Well, the issue is, what are you going to deliver aid with if there is no fuel? And we're not, I mean, this is not an issue that's up for debate. There's a UN resolution, Resolution 2417, which Ms. Powers should be very aware of, given the role that she played for the US and the UN, that says that not only should states be wary and fight against the use of starvation as a weapon of war, but that states must also allow for the means of food delivery systems, for the means of food preparation systems. And that means that access to fuel and water are critical. And if you deny that access, then essentially you are engaging in the use of starvation as a weapon of war. So, and I find it slightly concerning that you know, of course it's meaningful that aid is resuming to Houthi areas, but many aid agencies, including the UN, actually are reliant on the import of food. And supporting Yemenis in access to that imported food. Again, when you import food, it arrives at the port of Hodeidah, how are you getting it to the population without fuel?
And I should say that Samantha Powers was nominated to be head of USAID, the administrator nominee. Talk about the scope now, what the UN Secretary General has said about the scope of the problem, saying last week a donors conference netted $1.7 billion for humanitarian relief in Yemen. Less than half of you reported this, almost $4 billion needed to prevent widespread famine in Yemen.
I go back to the head of WFP, David Beasley's comment. It is hell on earth. There's no other way of putting it. When parents are faced with the choice of either feeding themselves, feeding their other children, or being able to afford to pay for the fuel, to take that child to be fed in a therapeutic feeding center, then you have gone out beyond the edge of what should be acceptable to the civilized world. It is a simple fix. Removing that fuel blockade immediately brings down the fuel prices. So parents were telling us that even coming from nearby provinces to the hospital we show you in the piece, it was costing something like $80. Can you imagine $80 in a country like Yemen? So fuel is more accessible. Fund the UN. The World Health Organization was providing some of that fuel to hospitals. For months now, it hasn't been able to provide any. So actually commit to funding the UN. But fundamentally also send the message that this is unacceptable, that you cannot blockade a nation of a basic necessity. That will allow some of this impact to be contained for a peaceful solution to be reached. But the U.S., Tim Lenderking, the U.S. envoy, speaks about how they are pushing for peace as an absolute priority. What are you saving these? What are you bringing peace to if people are dying, if their children are dying? Bringing the parties back to the negotiating table is absolutely integral to a sustained solution to this. Peace is integral to a sustained solution. But people are dying right now.
The Biden administration says they're reviewing President Trump designating the Houthis as a terrorist organization, the significance of this, and we just have 15 seconds.
Well, they have now suspended that, so that they have now removed that. So that has been very, very important for allowing food imports. But again, without fuel, where is that food arriving to?
Naima Bakir, I want to thank you so much for being with us, award-winning senior international correspondent for CNN. Her recent investigative report on Yemen's headline, "Famine has arrived in pockets of Yemen. Saudi's ships blocking fuel aren't helping." Coming up, we'll look at how Oprah Winfrey's interview with Meghan Markle and Prince Harry has exposed racism without the British royal family. Stay with us.
Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there, I do not sleep. Do not stand
The Ballad of Mairead Farrell by Seanachie and the Unity Squad. This is Democracy Now!, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The British royal family is facing increasing criticism after Meghan Markle and Prince Harry revealed shocking details about life as royals, including the racism suffered by Meghan Markle, who was born in the United States to a black mother and a white father. Last year, the couple left the United Kingdom and stepped down as senior members of Britain's royal family to raise their child Archie in North America. During a bombshell interview with Oprah Winfrey, Markle revealed they felt forced to leave in part due to concerns about Archie.
In those months when I was pregnant, all around this same time, so we have in tandem the conversation of he won't be given security, he's not going to be given a title, and also concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
What? There is a conversation. Hold up.
There's
Stop
several
right now.
There's several conversations.
There's a
about
conversation with you,
with Harry,
about how dark your baby is going to be?
Potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
Ooh. And you're not going to tell me who had the conversation?
I think that would be very damaging to them.
Meghan Markle said she was surprised by the racism she felt inside the royal family.
I lived in Canada, which is a Commonwealth country, for 7 years, but it wasn't until Harry and I were together that we started to travel through the Commonwealth. I would say 60-70% of which is people of color, right? And growing up as a woman of color, as a little girl of color, I know how important representation is, and I could never understand how it wouldn't be seen as an added benefit and a reflection of the world today, at all times, but especially right now, to go, how inclusive is that you can see someone who looks like you in this family, much less one who's born into it.
Meghan Markle also opened up to Oprah Winfrey about feelings of suicide during her time as a royal.
I just didn't want to be alive anymore. And that was a very clear and real and frightening, constant thought. And I remember how he just cradled me, and I went to the institution, and I said that I needed to go somewhere to get help. I said that I've never felt this way before, and I need to go somewhere. And I was told that I couldn't, that it wouldn't be good for the institution.
That's Meghan Markle speaking to Oprah Winfrey. We're joined now by two guests. Ash Sarkar is a senior editor at Novara Media. Trisha Goddard is a British journalist and pioneering talk show host. She's been credited with being the first black woman to host a talk show in Britain. Trisha, let's go to you first. If you can just respond to your feelings as you watch this interview and what was revealed.
Well, yes, it was bombshell after bombshell. It was absolutely shocking, but not surprising. I remember the headlines that came out around the time when Prince Harry just started dating Meghan Markle. Straight Outta Compton was one newspaper put it. Another newspaper article written actually by Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister's sister, Rachel Johnson, called her exotic with a dreadlocked mother from the wrong side of the tracks and what have you. And, it started then, although the British media would have you believe that this was a fairy tale wedding and everything was gorgeous and they were wonderful to Meghan Markle from the word go. There was always that undercurrent running through it. So when she talked about her feelings and when she talked about the conversations around the colour of the baby when she was pregnant, it didn't really shock anybody of colour, I don't think. Not in the UK anyway. And And the talking about her mental health, I've been a mental health campaigner for some 35 years. I was an Australian government advisor on mental health for 10 years. I was a member of the World Psychiatric Association. I've been all over the world trying to chip away at the stigma of mental health with Mind, charity and what have you. Now, when Meghan Markle actually spoke about how low she'd got, and Harry did as well, he said he went to a very dark place. What we saw was almost an upswing of people saying, you know, if she can talk about how desperate she was, then I can. And then, unfortunately, we had somebody in the British media kind of discount or say they didn't believe a word she said, and then the door shut again. So this whole interview has had a massive impact in the UK.
I want to go to a clip from the show Good Morning Britain. The issue of the media is so critical. We all know now that Piers Morgan has quit. But this is before he quit. And this is you, Tricia Goddard, clashing with Piers Morgan over his ongoing attacks against Meghan Markle.
Sorry, I'm calling this out for what I see it as, which is somebody who's a ruthless social climber and is now destroying or trying to destroy the image of the monarchy in this country, and I think it's shameful.
Piers, listening to you this morning, I'm saddened. You know what I wish for you? I wish for you only really wonderful things. I hope that one of your sons meets a beautiful black woman and gets married to them, and then you will understand.
Actually, I would love that. Why would I have any problem with that? Why does every criticism of these two have to be framed as racism?
You won't have a problem with it. You'll have to hear her problems.
Soon after this, the British journalist Piers Morgan quit his position as host of Good Morning Britain after he was widely criticized for his response to Meghan Markle's interview. Morgan walked off the set of the show Tuesday after the weather presenter, Alex Beresford, who is biracial himself, finally confronted Piers Morgan on air.
I understand that you've got a personal relationship with Meghan Markle, or had one, and she cut you off. She's entitled to cut you off if she wants to. Has she said anything about you since she cut you off? I don't think she has, but yet you continue to trash her.
OK, I'm done with this.
No.
Sorry, no. Sorry.
So, do you know what? That's pathetic.
You can trash me, mate, but not my own.
No.
See you later.
I'm being...
Sorry, can't do this.
This is absolutely diabolical behaviour. I'm sorry, but Piers spouts off on a regular basis, and we all have to sit there and listen. 6:30 to 7 o'clock yesterday was incredibly hard to watch.
So that's Alex Beresford berating Piers Morgan, finally, he said, after the nonstop barrage against Meghan Markle. And I'm wondering... Tricia, if you could talk about the significance of this. There were 43,000 complaints against Piers Morgan, and Meghan Markle has filed a formal complaint against Piers Morgan to the, you can explain what it is, the British regulator and the channel.
Yeah. Well, there was more of my disagreeing with Piers. Now, we're long-time colleagues because I report from the States for Good Morning Britain. I've known him for a while. But I have no problem in calling out a colleague or anybody, about issues of racism. And earlier in our conversation that I said that he didn't get to determine what was and wasn't racism against a black person, and that he should leave that to black people. And then afterwards, Alex reached out to me. And we had a private short exchange about that. He thanked me, and he said, he said it was difficult for him. And a lot of us support each other. Black journalists have to support each other. And then the next day, Alex said something himself. I note that Piers walked out when Alex actually talked about the fact that, and Piers has said this himself, that he was quite hurt when he gave Meghan Markle his number, they exchanged numbers, and he never heard from her again. So I think there might be some misogyny in there as well as everything else. But look, Piers is a great journalist. That doesn't exclude him from holding opinions that he doesn't see as racist. Now, there is a bedrock to this, Amy. There's an absolute bedrock to this. Reporting from the States and being in the UK and in Australia this last week has really brought something home to me. In the United States, you had slavery on this soil. There are people like my partner who can remember segregation. The fallout from redlining with housing is still going on. You have George Floyd, you have Breonna Taylor, and so on and so forth. But it happened on this soil. Slavery happened on American soil. In the UK, slavery did not happen at home, if you like. It was outsourced to the West Indies, where, slaves were put in the West Indies, where my heritage is from, Africa, and so forth. So the British people didn't have it in their face, so they don't think they're racist.
I wanted to bring Ash Sarkar into the conversation, senior editor at Novara Media, speaking to us from London. Ash, respond to the whole controversy that has erupted. I mean, Noam Chomsky said Meghan Markle could possibly bring down the royal family, the monarchy. Talk about the family and the media.
Well, I don't think Meghan Markle's necessarily going to bring down the monarchy, because it has survived some very dysfunctional and very nasty family dynamics before, going right from Henry VIII and his many, many marriages, right through to the abdication crisis of Edward VIII, and then, of course, the divorce between Prince Charles and Princess Diana. But the reason why I think this has really gotten to the heart of the clash between this feudal institution, which in many ways entrenches class inequality at the heart of the British non-constitution, and also some more modern values and progressive values, is because essentially you can't have an institution which is premised on the superiority of bloodline and have it not be racist, and have it not be controlling of women, and indeed quite misogynistic. One of the things that Meghan Markle said in the interview was that when she married into the family, she had to hand over her passport, her driver's license, and her keys. Now, if any one of our friends was entering into a relationship where they had to hand over their passport, we'd be saying, get out of there, babe. What are you doing? So I think we've got to see these features as very, very, very well entrenched within the royal family itself. Now, as for, I think, how firm support for the monarchy is in this country, support for the abolition of the monarchy and the establishing of an elected head of state rose by +4 percentage points, according to a recent poll. And that is due to the Meghan Markle and Oprah interview. However, it's still very low. It's around a quarter of the population. And I think a big part of that is because for most of the country, we've only known the Queen when she's already quite old. And so she's been able to play into these images of almost grandmother of a nation. She also came to the throne in the 1950s when broadcast and televisual media is still kind of in its infancy. And so she solidified her reign at the same time.
We have 10 seconds, Ash.
As her image was being broadcast into our homes. So the legitimacy crisis, I think it's going to come when Prince Charles ascends to the throne, who's also meddled in one or two political matters, which a monarch really shouldn't do.
Ash Sarkar, I want to thank you very much, and we're going to link to your piece, How Harry and Meghan Quit the Royal Family to Join the U.S. Aristocracy. Ash Sarkar, senior editor at Novara Media, and Trisha Goddard, British journalist and pioneering talk show host. That does it for our broadcast. I'm Amy Goodman. Stay safe, wear a mask, wear two.